Thank you, Professor Zhou. And my name is Frank Liu, also called Zheng San. I cannot distinguish which one should use here. The co-author, Professor Hong Yong-tai, is one of the important contributors of this paper, but he could not make it today. So I will present all the findings made by both of us. The title is Profiles and Voting Patterns of a Taiwan Intelligent Voter. It's already introduced to you by Dr. Liao. It's called iVoter. This is an observation of using the two-way surveys collected from this VAA platform. As Steve just told everybody that this is very self-selecting data. I probably will begin with some clarification of the data. It's not totally composed of the young activists. It's actually composed a lot of activists participating in this VAA platform, but the profile we are going to show you is not every young adult is actually that active. So our first part is to introduce to you the probably profile of these young voters. And it's not generalizable as everybody knows, but you may take that to think about other young students, people, and who is actually hand online all the time. They probably share the similar behavior patterns that we can do the research in the future. This is the website that when we launched that, we initiated the first wave of survey. So all the participants who want to draw the iPad 2 actually sign up. Then we collect the 647 individuals. Actually, participants is the number of participants is far more than this number, but only consistent and of individuals who insist to win the iPad 2, they may complete the two waves of the survey. The purpose of this research is not very theoretical, but we came out with two. Usually we should do the theoretical based research in order to publish in the journal. But now we have data, so it's actually a data-driven research. Then we have to come out what to do with that first. So I come up with the two ideas of using this web panel, which is self-selected. Theory-driven inquiry, which is the one may fit our knowledge, may fit what we already know. There's the influence of partisanship, the influence of partisan strength, etc. So we try to use the data to test the hypothesis that we already know. If a sample is a random sample can be tested testing the hypothesis, then the biased sample should also pass the hypothesis testing. Because if theory is correct, even biased data, we should be able to find something supporting this conventional wisdom. And this is the boring part, because everyone knows theory still holds. The non-theory driven purpose is to try to understand more by taking advantage of this two-wave survey, which is not very possible in the daily life. Two-wave survey, the panel data means that we take all participants survey at time 1, and then resurvey at time 2. And the critical date is the election day, presidential and the elective election. So individuals who vote, who fill the form before the election, they are asked to fill the form about the campaign after the election day. So we think the behavior, particularly the media consumption behavior of these individuals, may reveal something interesting for us to understand the generation C. Now it's not beyond X and Y and Z. So basic profiles, some overlapping part is, I don't want to mention too much about the overlapping part. Young voters, they are younger, 85% actually are 20-something. that mostly students who are actually will be attracted by iPad 2. Students, people who are always online, people who are actually technically sophisticated, as we can know. But we also find they are politically aware. They are politically aware, so we don't use the activists. They are very aware of the campaign. And 7 out of 10 of them living in the metropolitan area, including the 5 major cities. So you still start to see the profile of this sample. Even it's self-selecting, but it's actually based on the young people located in the major cities. They are digitally connected, technically sophisticated. In the multiple questions we asked to them, they can pick up which web service they use open. Not surprised, 86% are member of Facebook. Then the others, probably not very known to the American colleagues, European colleagues. A lot of young students use BBS. Now the most famous one, the biggest one is PTT. It's a bulletin board system. College students all staying on that, taking that as the social media, as the second alternative to Facebook. And they are members, half of them members of Google, some the EYNY is something I didn't know before, but this is the bulletin board information service. Plurk and Twitter are used. So quickly overview the media use behavior of them. They don't watch TV all the time. 17% of them, they seldom watch TV or not at all because they stay online. And 24% exit 2 news channels or more. So we can see that 1/2 of the sample is actually very politically aware. And this is related to the conclusion I'm going to share with you. These politically aware young adults have a different pattern of consolidating their preferences over time. This is something I'll bring up later. Most of the time, they spend the internet on this part. They spend a lot of time, probably all night. 22% of them spend online 8 hours per day. Totally, probably over 60% of young guys spend time online at least 4 hours. At least 2 hours. Everybody at least 2 hours, but half of them over 6 hours. What do they do online? And 73% probably check emails. They stay on Facebook, BBS, etc. The other activities including watching the videos, shopping, gaming, etc. Then come to the voting behavior. I think this part is not of interest to the audience anymore because the election is finished. So we are not interested in who they support for, how many people support for Ma and Tsai. So we'll skip this part and leave it to the paper. But the part of the interesting part is how much time they need to make a decision before the election. This is something contradicts what we thought in the beginning. We thought that young voters are very volatile in their preferences. They probably will stay to the very end of the election to make the decision. But for this politically aware, not everybody, but almost half of these individuals, they made their mind early. Somebody even 6 months earlier when the candidates announced they are going to run for the office. So the rest of them, very few of them decide on the election day. So we now have the idea of the sample. It's not representative of all young voters, but very close to the spectrum of the young voters is very politically aware. So how do we take advantage of this panel data? So far, I just show you the profile with the wave 1, time 1 data. showing the profile. So we take the use of the panel so we can see the change of their voting behavior. So we categorize those behavior into 5 types. One is from time 1 to time 2, they remain supporting the same candidate or parties. So category 2, they change their vote choice. The first one category is just a preference, supporting or not support. The second one is the actual want to vote for somebody, actual vote. Third is the from not voting for nobody to start to support somebody. There's a third category. The fourth, they probably will be ambivalent in the beginning, but they turn to support. The third one is supporting nobody. They become too ambivalent and then decide not to participate. And the fourth, they start to become clear about who to vote for. And the number 5 is from time 1 to time 2, they remain indifferent. They don't care. They just stay away from the campaign. So the 2 elections is listed here. For the presidential election and the legislative election, we don't see much difference except the 2 parts. For the presidential election, we see much more young adults. They from not to vote and then turn to support some. They decide not to vote or turn to support nobody. They become they quit from participating in the game. And change vote choices, dangling between the supporter, the candidates. We see much more people doing this in a legislative election. One of the guess explanation here is we have witnessed too much information provided regarding presidential election, driving those young voters away. But the young voters actually decide late. They would pay more attention to legislative election, and then they can make their minds switch back and forth. This is a very primitive explanation for this pattern difference. Then we do some modeling. Our dependent variable clearly is the 5 categories of the voting types. We want to see how these variables explain the pattern change. Due to time limit, we just draw this partisan strength as the key independent variable. And we already know that. Those people who are more calling themselves independent probably will likely to volatile. That's proved to be true inside this bias model, bias sample. But we also control for the following variable. One is using this VAA platform. Second is they reading online news. The third is the 4 demographic variables. The table is quite boring. I just skip that, showing the results. Table 2 and table 3 showing the results. But for the 2 elections, first presidential election, we find that those people who are quite likely, it's very likely that the weak partisans have the following patterns. The weak partisans or the young voters who call themselves independents, they are not supporting for the same candidate, as we already know. They are more likely to dangle between the candidates. They remain indifferent to the election. The category 5. This is the category 1, this is category 5. Those young voters with the weak partisanship, they are very likely to be volatile in their vote choice, or they are very likely to remain indifferent in the end. But the one thing that has really surprised us is this. They are less likely to change their vote choice. This is something that we don't understand from our data. This is actually a negative sign, negative and a significant sign in this sample. How do we understand? They are volatile in the supporting for the candidate. I want to support Tsai, I want to support Ma. They are dangling between. But when we ask them, who are you going to vote for? Who are you going to vote for? And who do you really vote for? Votes. They are very consistent. This is something need to explore later. But when we look into the electoral election, then we seem to understand why. For legislative election, reading online newspaper and being weak in partisanship are negatively associated with the likelihood of supporting for the same candidate. This means if you continually using online newspaper, those young voters remain stable in their vote choice. If continuously using newspaper, online newspaper, they are very likely to stay their preferences, their choice. The second one, being weak in partisanship, is consistent with the first one. So the conclusion is, we found that the online newspaper readership is actually strengthening the stability of vote choices. And this is a recall, remind me and remind us about a theory called the use and gratification theory that is very commonly previously used in the communication study field. This is a theory basically suggests that when you consume some political information, you use that to strengthen your existing beliefs. You actively access online news, but you are not exposing yourself to a variety of opinions. Instead, those actives or young voters, they go online and search for the information or news to strengthen what they already know. If I continue want to support somebody, then the news is going to support myself. And this is use and gratification. It's like a gratification magnet attracting those information to supporting yourself. This is something that we find theoretically may solid and may help us to understand the pattern we found. For the future, I still suggest this sample should be compared across other data sets that are targeting different young voters. Maybe the young voter, maybe the indifferent group instead of the actives group. Then if we can expand this data to those young voters, maybe we have a bigger picture. And until that moment, we can make some generalization. We are far from those generalization stage. So I think this descriptive study will give everybody some idea how our young voters suffering, how their eyes actually are suffering from watching screen too long. And also, we can understand how parents influence their children. Because those 1/5 of the sample, the young voters, they participate in politics because they report their parents are involved in the campaign. So this is something we can explore later. Young voters are not actually the innocent, not innocent. Instead, they are influenced by their context. If they are not influenced by context, they may be influenced by online context. And they access the online context consciously. So back to the beginning of the presidential election result, why those indifferent, why these weak partisan voters, they become very stable in their vote choice. Because weak partisans can still have a preference. With that preference, and they go online, they are probably stubborn. They're probably very stubborn, choosing who they already want to vote for. I don't know. This is something left for discussion. Leave this open. Because the pattern is found, then I would leave everybody to participate and correct me. Thank you very much.
My name is Eric Yu, and I'm from National Chengchi University. And it's always my great pleasure to visit this university, as I came over maybe like every 6 months. So I really enjoy the great sunshine over here, but probably I just put the big coat today, so unfortunately, I was not enjoy the sunshine that much, but I'm always glad to be here. Okay, and I think I feel really excited about the project in terms of the iVoter project, and I actually look at the website before the election, because I saw that Professor Liao always do something. Professor Liao always do something big and always try new stuff. And I think this is kind of a project that I always dream about. That if Taiwan can have this type of more informative and more interactive between politicians and voters, and to try to create more interaction between politicians and voters, and try to provide more information to voters. And I think this is the right project to go. And I'm really glad that it's kicked off this year. And I think this is the first cut that Professor Liu and Professor Hong used the data. It's kind of web-based panel data to conduct try to focus on the old question, that is, does partisanship matters in the voting behavior? And although it's a kind of an old research question, but it focuses on new dimension in the sense that it particularly focuses on those young voters. And I think if you observe the campaign in Taiwan, you might notice that the two major parties really pay a lot of attention on young voters, and they invest quite a lot to build up the website, to recruit young people in the camp, and try to mobilize, not only mobilize the voters, but try to nurture their base among young people. That's kind of quite important for them. And as a researcher, I have been asked about what kind of the voting behavior among young voters quite several times during the campaign season, when people ask, especially those news medias, wants to get something juicy, want to write their story, they always focus on young voters. So I think this is the right direction to go, in the sense that they try to explore the young voters' voting behavior, and by using the web-based survey, which I think the young voters are really familiar with these kind of technology and tools. And so I think this is the right topic. And Zheng San and Professor Hong confirmed the conventional wisdom that the partisan does make some kind of difference, and even among those young voters, who are just maybe first-time or second-time voters. And then they also find that that kind of online media exposure also makes some kind of difference in terms of strengthen voters' voting preference. And so I think the authors try to use the new data to confirm the old findings, and so I think it's quite of it's a really interesting. And one thing that I want to suggest is that, because I think Zheng San knows that the TEDS has data, and this time TEDS, which is a Taiwan Election Democratization Studies, and Zheng San and I were both in the not steering committee, that kind of working group a couple of times before, and Zheng San knows the data pretty well. So maybe you can use the data, because this time TDS also have the panel data, so you can look up the panel data, particularly focusing on those young voters, to make the comparison and to see if that kind of face-to-face, if that kind of result obtained by the face-to-face surveys are similar to the results, the results you collect by the internet, by the web panel survey. Okay, and but although when I look at the platform, the iVoters platform, or that kind, when I look at the iVoters project, I agree that you can do those web surveys like I am doing, because Professor Jia Hong Cai and I are doing web surveys for about for about 1.5 years by using the traditional web-based survey. We email people and recruit people and try to build up the panel, and then send out the questionnaire and to get the data and try to correct the result and compare our result against the result obtained by the telephone surveys. We did that kind of traditional web survey stuff, and I do think that your platform can do much more than that, because this is kind of a project that focuses on the interaction between I think this kind of this is a platform to create more space for more interactions. I mean, initially, this iVoter project tried to inform voters, try to give more information to the voters. So then we might think more about what kind of information that the voters can get, and what kind of a response that the voters will give, especially among young voters. Because from your data, you notice that the one thing that strikes me is that maybe I think about 35% of the young voters made their vote choice just prior to, but just at the time that both parties announced the candidate. And that means, it seems to me that information doesn't, the campaign does not make any difference at all, especially for those 30+% of people. But this project intends to provide information and try to create more interaction between politicians and voters. So you might want to take advantage about that to study the campaign effects. And because it's not going to be like just two-wave survey, it could be like a continuous observations, and try to see whether the campaign makes some kind of difference, and to see, and then the other thing I think, especially the last paper mentioned that the importance of the new network might be a new way to create a new way for political socialization. It's not because of your parents, because of your kind of schooling experience, but your experience on the internet might create some kind of might be the way to socialize people about political attitudes. So this might be the direction that you can explore. And the final thing is that, although I think when you focus on party ID, this is a place that you can test two things. One is, of course, is an old Michigan school idea about political psychological attachment, psychological explanation about the party ID. And when you focus, and when your project actually can focus on information flow, you can study whether in Taiwan party ID is simply just an information shortcut, right? Argued by Sim Hopkins. So you can test both models, and because you can create more interaction between your platform and you might want to take advantage of that. So, and about other web survey stuff, maybe we can chat about that in dinner. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.